Deuterocanonical books is a term used since the 16th century in the Catholic Church and Eastern Christianity to describe certain books and passages of the Christian Old Testament that are not part of the current Hebrew Bible. The term is used in contrast to the protocanonical books, which are contained in the Hebrew Bible. This distinction had previously contributed to debate in the early Church about whether they should be classified as canonical texts. The term is used as a matter of convenience by the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church and other churches to refer to books of their Old Testament, which are not part of the Masoretic text. The Deuterocanonical books are considered canonical by Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, and the Church of the East, but are considered non-canonical by most Protestants. The word Deuterocanonical comes from the Greek meaning, belonging to the second canon. The original usage of the term distinguished these scriptures both from those considered non-canonical and from those considered protocanonical. However, some editions of the Bible include text from both Deuterocanonical and non-canonical scriptures in a single section designated Apocrypha. This arrangement can lead to conflation between the otherwise distinct terms Deuterocanonical and apocryphal. History. Deuterocanonical is a term coined in 1566 by the theologian Sixtus of Siena, who had converted to Catholicism from Judaism, to describe scriptural texts of the Old Testament considered canonical by the Catholic Church, but which are not present in the Hebrew Bible today, and including some texts which had been omitted by some early canon lists, especially in the East. Their acceptance among early Christians was widespread, though not universal, and the Bible of the early Church always included, with varying degrees of recognition, books now called Deuterocanonical. Some say that their canonicity seems not to have been doubted in the Church until it was challenged by Jews after AD 100, sometimes postulating a hypothetical Council of Jamnia. Regional councils in the West published official canons that included these books as early as the 4th and 5th centuries. The Catholic Encyclopedia states that, at Jerusalem there was a renewal, or at least a survival, of Jewish ideas, the tendency there being distinctly unfavorable to the Deuterists. St. Cyril of Jerusalem, while vindicating for the Church the right to fix the canon, places them among the Apocrypha and forbids all books to be read privately which are not read in the churches. In Antioch and Syria the attitude was more favorable. St. Epiphanius of Salamis hesitated about the rank of the Deuterists. While he esteemed them, they did not hold the same place as the Hebrew books in his regard. On the other hand, the Oriental versions and Greek manuscripts of the period are more liberal. They have all the Deuterocanonicals and, in some cases, certain Apocrypha, in the Latin Church, all through the Middle Ages. There is evidence of hesitation about the character of the Deuterocanonicals. One is favorable, the other unfavorable to their authority and sacredness. Wavering between the two are a number of writers whose veneration for these books is tempered by some perplexity as to their exact standing, and among those is St. Thomas Aquinas. Few are found to unequivocally acknowledge their canonicity. The prevailing attitude of Western medieval authors is substantially that of the Greek Fathers. The chief cause of this phenomenon in the West is to be sought in the influence, direct and indirect, of St. Jerome's depreciating Prologus. Meanwhile, the protocanonical books of the Old Testament correspond with those of the Bible of the Hebrews, and the Old Testament is received by Protestants. Dead Sea Scrolls. Fragments of 3 Deuterocanonical books have been found among the Dead Sea Scrolls found at Qumran, in addition to several partial copies of Enoch and Jubilees from the Ethiopic Deuterocanon. Sirach, whose Hebrew text was already known from the Cairo Geniza, has been found in 2 scrolls in Hebrew. Another Hebrew scroll of Sirach has been found in Masada. The Book of Tobit has been found in Qumran in 4 scrolls written in Aramaic and in 1 written in Hebrew. The letter of Jeremiah has been found in Cave 7 in Greek. It has been theorized by recent scholars that the Qumran library was not entirely produced at Qumran, but may have included part of the library of the Jerusalem temple, that may have been hidden in the caves for safekeeping at the time the temple was destroyed by Romans in 70 AD. Influence of the Septuagint. The large majority of Old Testament references in the New Testament are taken from the Koine Greek Septuagint editions, of which include the Deuterocanonical Books, as well as Apocrypha, both of which are called collectively Nu Alpha Gamma Iota Gamma Nu Omega Sigma Kappa Omicron Mu Epsilon Nu Alpha Anagenius Domina. No two Septuagint codices contain the same Apocrypha, and the three earliest manuscripts of the LXX show uncertainty as to which books constitute the complete list of the Apocrypha. Codex Vaticanus lacks 1-4 Maccabees but includes 1 Esdras, while Codex Sinaiticus omits Baruch, but includes 4 Maccabees. Codex Alexandrinus includes the LXX, and Greek Psalm manuscripts from the 5th century contain 3 New Testament Psalms: the Magnificat, the Benedictus, the Nunc Dimittis from Luke's birth narrative, and the conclusion of the hymn that begins with the Gloria in Excelsis. Beckwith states that manuscripts of anything like the capacity of Codex Alexandrinus were not used in the first centuries of the Christian era, and believes that the comprehensive codices of the Septuagint, which start appearing in the 4th century AD, are all of Christian origin. Some Deuterocanonical appear to have been written originally in Hebrew, but the original text has long been lost. Archaeological finds, however, discovered some original texts among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Septuagint was widely accepted and used by Greek-speaking Jews in the 1st century, even in the region of Roman Judea, and therefore naturally became the text most widely used by early Christians, who were predominantly Greek-speaking. In the New Testament, Hebrews chapter 11 verse 35 is understood by some as referring to an event that was recorded in one of the Deuterocanonical books, 2 Maccabees. Other New Testament authors also quote period literature which was familiar to the audience but that was not included in the Old Testament or the Deuterocanonical books. For instance, Paul cites Greek writers and philosophers, and the author of Hebrews references oral tradition which spoke of an Old Testament prophet who was sawn in half in Hebrews chapter 11 verse 37, 2 verses after the second Maccabees reference. The Jewish historian Josephus speaks of there being 22 books in the canon of the Hebrew Bible, a Jewish tradition reported also by the Christian bishop Athanasius. However, included in Athanasius's list of 22 Old Testament books are Baruch and the letter of Jeremiah. At the same time, he mentioned that certain other books, including 5 Deuterocanonical books but also the Didache and the Shepherd of Hermas, while not being part of the New Testament canon, were appointed by the Fathers to be read. He excluded what he called apocryphal writings entirely. In the Catholic Church, the first infallible and effectually promulgated pronouncement on the canon was that defined by the Council of Trent. Among the minority, in Trent, that showed opposition to these books' inclusion were Cardinals Siripander and Cajetan, the latter an opponent of Luther at Augsburg. However, Trent confirmed the statements of earlier and less authoritative regional councils which also included the Deuterocanonical books, such as the Synod of Hippo, and the Councils of Carthage of 397. Much later, the Council of Florence taught the divine inspiration of these books, but did not formally pass on their canonicity, according to a blogger, Bill Webster. Controversy remains as to the significance of Trent's omission of the Septuagint version of 1 Esdras which Carthage may have ratified. He says that there is ambiguity over the naming of the books of Esdras since the canon of Hippo lists 2 books of Esdras. Thus this could mean 1 Esdras and Ezra Nehemiah as in the Septuagint or Ezra and Nehemiah as in the Vulgate. However, Augustine of Hippo explains the relation between the two books of Ezra, Esdras, and its separation with Chronicles, and the two of Ezra, which last look more like a sequel to the continuous regular history which terminates with the books of Kings and Chronicles. Philip Schaff says that the Council of Hippo in 393, and the Third Council of Carthage in 397, under the influence of Augustine, who attended both, fixed the Catholic canon of the Holy Scriptures, including the Apocrypha of the Old Testament. This decision of the Transmarine Church, however, was subject to ratification, and the concurrence of the Roman See it received when Innocent I and Gelasius I repeated the same index of biblical books. This canon remained undisturbed till the 16th century, and was sanctioned by the Council of Trent at its fourth session. The Catholic Deuterocanonical scriptural texts are Tobit, Judith, additions to Esther, Wisdom, Sirach, Baruch, including the letter of Jeremiah, additions to Daniel, prayer of Azariah and song of the three holy children Susanna, Bel and the dragon. 1 Maccabees, 2 Maccabees. Influence of the Vulgate. Jerome in the Vulgate's prologues describes a canon which excludes the Deuterocanonical books, possibly excepting Baruch. In his prologues, Jerome mentions all of the Deuterocanonical and apocryphal works by name as being apocryphal or not in the canon, except for Prayer of Manasses and Baruch. He mentions Baruch by name in his prologue to Jeremiah, and notes that it is neither read nor held among the Hebrews, but does not explicitly call it apocryphal or not in the canon. The inferior status to which the Deuterocanonical books were relegated by authorities like Jerome is seen by some as being due to a rigid conception of canonicity, one demanding that a book to be entitled to this supreme dignity must be received by all, must have the sanction of Jewish antiquity, and must moreover be adapted not only to edification, but also to the confirmation of the doctrine of the Church. Eventually, however, Jerome's Vulgate did include the Deuterocanonical books as well as Apocrypha. Jerome referenced and quoted from some as scripture despite describing them as not in the canon. Michael Barber asserts that, although Jerome was once suspicious of the Apocrypha, he later viewed them as scripture. Barber argues that this is clear from Jerome's epistles. He cites Jerome's letter to Eustochium, in which Jerome quotes Sirach 13:2. Elsewhere, Jerome apparently also refers to Baruch, the story of Susanna and Wisdom as scripture. In his prologue to Judith, without using the word canon, he mentioned that Judith was held to be scriptural by the First Council of Nicaea. In his reply to Rufinus, he affirmed that he was consistent with the choice of the Church regarding which version of the Deuterocanonical portions of Daniel to use, which the Jews of his day did not include. What sin have I committed in following the judgment of the churches? But when I repeat what the Jews say against the story of Susanna and the hymn of the three children, and the fables of Bel and the dragon, which are not contained in the Hebrew Bible, the man who makes this a charge against me proves himself to be a fool and a slanderer, for I explained not what I thought but what they commonly say against us. Thus Jerome acknowledged the principle by which the canon would be settled, the judgment of the Church, rather than his own judgment or the judgment of Jews, though, concerning translation of Daniel to Greek, he wondered why one should use the version of a translator whom he regarded as heretic and Judaizer. The Vulgate is also important as the touchstone of the canon concerning which parts of books are canonical. When the Council of Trent listed the books included in the canon, it qualified the books as being entire with all their parts, as they have been used to be read in the Catholic Church, and as they are contained in the Old Latin Vulgate edition. This decree was clarified somewhat by Pope Pius XI on June 2, 1927, who allowed that the Comma Johanneum was open to dispute, and it was further explicated by Pope Pius XII's Divino Afflanti Spiritu. In Orthodox Christianity, outside the Roman Catholic Church, the term deuterocanonical is sometimes used, by way of analogy, to describe books that Eastern Orthodoxy and Oriental Orthodoxy included in the Old Testament that are not part of the Jewish Tanakh, nor the Protestant Old Testament. Among Orthodox, the term is understood to mean that they were compiled separately from the primary canon, as explained in 2 Esdras, where Esdras is instructed to keep certain books separate and hidden. Eastern Orthodoxy. The Eastern Orthodox churches have traditionally included all the books of the Septuagint in their Old Testaments. The Greeks use the word anageniostomina to describe the books of the Greek Septuagint that are not present in the Hebrew Tanakh. When Orthodox theologians use the term deuterocanonical, it is important to note that the meaning is not identical to the Roman Catholic usage. In Orthodox Christianity, deuterocanonical means that a book is part of the corpus of the Old Testament but has secondary authority. In other words, deutero applies to authority or witnessing power, whereas in Roman Catholicism, deutero applies to chronology, not to authority. The Eastern Orthodox books of the Old Testament include the Deuterocanonical books listed above, plus 3 Maccabees and 1 Esdras, while Baruch is divided from the Epistle of Jeremiah, making a total of 49 Old Testament books in contrast with the Protestant 39-book canon. Like the Roman Catholic Deuterocanonical books, these texts are integrated with the rest of the Old Testament, not printed in a separate section. Other texts printed in Orthodox Bibles are considered of some value or are included as an appendix. Ethiopian Orthodoxy. In the Amharic Bible used by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, those books of the Old Testament that are still counted as canonical, but not by all other churches, are often set in a separate section titled Deuterocanonical, which is the same word. The Ethiopian Orthodox Deuterocanon, in addition to the standard set listed above, along with the books of Esdras and Prayer of Minas, also includes some books that are still held canonical by only the Ethiopian Church, including Enoch or Henoch, Kuphael and 1, 2 and 3 Maccabean. Jewish position. Judaism and most Protestant versions of the Bible exclude these books. It is commonly said that Judaism officially excluded the Deuterocanonicals and the additional Greek texts listed here from their scripture in the Council of Jamnia. But this claim is also disputed. In Christian churches having their origins in the Protestant Reformation, Anglicanism, there is a great deal of overlap between the Apocrypha section of the original 1611 King James Bible and the Catholic Deuterocanon, but the two are distinct. The Apocrypha section of the original 1611 King James Bible includes, in addition to the Deuterocanonical books, the following 3 books, which were not included in the list of the canonical books by the Council of Trent. 1 Esdras, 2 Esdras, Prayer of Manasseh. These books make up the Apocrypha section of the Clementine Vulgate. 3 Esdras, 4 Esdras, and the Prayer of Manasseh, where they are specifically described as outside of the series of the canon. The 1609 Douay Bible includes them in an appendix, but they have been dropped from recent Catholic translations into English. They are found, along with the Deuterocanonical books, in the Apocrypha section of Protestant Bibles. Using the word Apocrypha to describe texts, although not necessarily pejorative, implies to some people that the writings in question should not be included in the canon of the Bible. This classification commingles them with certain non-canonical Gospels and New Testament Apocrypha. The Style Manual for the Society of Biblical Literature recommends the use of the term deuterocanonical literature instead of apocrypha in academic writing. The 39 Articles of Religion of the Church of England lists the deuterocanonical books as suitable to be read for example of life and instruction of manners. but yet doth not apply them to establish any doctrine. The early lectionaries of the Anglican Church included the Deuterocanonical Books amongst the cycle of readings, and passages from them were used in the services. Readings from the Deuterocanonical Books are now included in most, if not all, of the modern lectionaries in the Anglican Communion, based on the Revised Common Lectionary, though alternate readings from protocanonical books are also provided. Presbyterianism. The Westminster Confession of Faith, a Calvinist document that serves as a systematic summary of doctrine for the Church of Scotland and Presbyterian churches worldwide, recognizes only the 66 books of the Protestant canon as authentic scripture. Chapter 1, Article 3 of the Confession reads,